This is a new radiator, and this is a front mudguard for my 2023 Triumph Speed Triple 1200 RS.
Together, they come to about $1,000, but can you guess which one costs more?
Wrong. They both cost about the same.
Now, I knew a radiator would be expensive, but I didn't take into account replacing the carbon fiber mudguard when I bought my cheap Facebook Marketplace find Super Naked.
However, they are both genuine Triumph parts, so I guess that does explain the mudguard's hefty price tag. That says made in China. And after 81 excruciating days of waiting, my front end is finally fixed.
Everything from the axle to the forks to the clamps to the steering stem got some much needed TLC.
So that means today we can get the bike back on its wheels, and even to the point where we can fire it up. Except we're missing one more important piece that I'll get to a bit later on. To be honest, I thought I was clever when I paid just $3,924 for a 2023 Super Naked with a mere 5,000 kilometers on it.
But then, having to buy a brand new frame meant that the budget took a pretty big hit.
So again, I thought I was being clever when I saved $240 by fixing the scratched piston in my Brembo brake caliper with $5 glue. In my defense, it's very fancy glue.
But according to the internet, I should be put in a psych ward, inside a prison, on a remote island, and be given a Harley to ride as punishment.
I guess it's inevitable then. I have to make my first sincere YouTuber apology video. But the truth is, when it feels like the whole internet is calling you stupid, it kinda hurts.
First, there was denial.
They don't know what they're talking about. My fix is perfect.
Then there was anger.
I'm sorry I lied to you about being a certified mechanic. Oh right, I remind you in just about every video that I have no idea what I'm doing here. You think I'm setting a bad example? What makes you think I wanted to be a good example in the first place? I'm sorry that you need a YouTuber to tell you what is safe or dangerous. Get your own common sense.
I didn't skip the bargaining phase either.
These idiots know I can turn off the comments, right? Or just delete them. Or just delete the whole video and no one will ever remember that I screwed up. Then we'll both be happy.
The depression phase wasn't pretty.
It's time. I'm just gonna sell all my bikes and quit YouTube. I'd be happier driving trucks or cleaning swimming pools anyway.
And finally, there was acceptance.
Oh, cool. That video made enough money to buy the new pistons and seals anyway. Yes, please order me that piston and seal kit. I found a loophole. It takes a big man to admit when he's done something wrong. And I'm not mature enough for that yet. But sometimes I get caught up in the YouTube timeline. And I think more about whether I can do something than whether I should do it. I love the idea of fixing something compared to just buying a new one. But lesson learned, don't mess with safety related things, only aesthetics. The new pistons and seals will be here in about a week or so, but for now, we've got some more work to do.
I'm sure you remember how the forks were bent from the accident. The axle was bent when we took it out, and since the threads on the steering stem were stripped, I had to cut the adjuster nut off. So the axle has now been straightened, which is much cheaper than buying a new one, and looks as good as new. The steering stem was welded up where I nicked it while cutting the adjuster nut off, and then it was re-threaded, so you can't even tell what happened. The fork outers were straightened and re-anodized so they look brand new, and obviously fresh oil and seals.
And the reason this took almost 3 months to do is because of these stanchions. Now, they were scratched because of that mangled brake disc rubbing up against them, so they needed to be re-chromed. Now apparently they use a chemical process to remove the old chroming. And if you remember, these forks originally had gold colored stanchions. And for whatever reason, that chemical process wouldn't work, it wouldn't remove it. So they ended up having to manually grind the old chroming off. They also said that they couldn't match the gold color, but they could do either silver or black. And I asked for black because I thought that would be really cool against the gold. But after they had to grind off the original chroming, they ended up having to do silver because apparently the different colors are different thicknesses. So in order to get this to the perfect diameter, it had to be silver. But the irony is that a 2025 Speed Triple actually has silver stanchions now, so mine is going to fit right in. And all of this work cost $420. So that's about $5 a day. And I've already started work on this because when I got it back, the bottom bearing race here hadn't been installed yet. I actually have a few options here because the frame itself came with new neck bearings for top and bottom. However, they did not come with new dust seals. Luckily, I didn't know that the frame was going to come with bearings, so I ordered new bearings before that, and of course, I ordered dust seals to go with that. So we're all set. And I even have spares, so if I screw this up, I can try again.
Since I don't have a hydraulic press, I tried another method I've seen on YouTube hundreds of times, but never tried myself. The bottom clamp spent the night in my freezer to contract, and then I brought it to the workshop in a cooler box. Then, to heat up the bearing race, I put it in my coffee roaster. Random, I know, but you have to work with what you have. While that was heating up a bit and hopefully expanding, I slid the dust seal onto the steering stem so I wouldn't forget it. And then it was time to get the preheated bearing out. Unfortunately, it didn't just slip on like I'd hoped. But I still managed to tap it on very gently, constantly working my way around the bearing so that it's always level and being careful not to mar the bearing surface. It's not the perfect method, but it's better than gluing it on, right? And luckily for the outer bearing races, the new frame came with them pre-installed. It's been so long that I don't even remember what replacement parts I ordered. It's a good thing I was born after the internet was invented then. But with all the parts accounted for, I packed the new bearings with grease and lathered up any other bearing surfaces, probably with too much grease. The bottom clamp is simple, but before the top clamp, it needs the ball bearings in their cage, the inner race and the dust seal to make up the bearing. Then there's this frame cover, followed by the adjuster nut that gets tightened and determines how stiff your steering is. Then for some reason, a rubber washer gets sandwiched between that and the lock nut, and finally a tabbed washer prevents either of those nuts from spinning freely.
So these bolts sticking out the side of the frame are what hold the headlight assembly on, and we won't be able to get to them if the forks are back in place. Well, we will, but it'll be easier without it. So let's get that on now.
Some disassembly was needed beforehand, since a couple of the connectors are impossible to reach otherwise. Even so, I wished for smaller fingers, but with everything reconnected, I could reassemble the headlight and bolt it to the frame.
It's looking more like a bike. A funny looking bike, but a bike.
The next challenge was the top clamp, thanks to the wire for the steering lock mechanism that needs to be fed through this tiny and cluttered hole in the frame. I ended up forcing a pick through the frame, which I could use to guide a piece of string into place. Then I tied the string around the connector, and after a bit of fiddling, I was able to route it successfully. But that success didn't last long.
It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back at the moment because the headlight is disassembled once again, because I just realized that the throttle plugs into a connector deep within the headlight. Great design, but I guess better late than never. I was just going to leave it off, but I think the throttle's quite important.
With that sorted, I prepped the forks. To my surprise, with a bit of brake cleaner, I even managed to get the majority of scratches off caused by the accident, making that sexy Öhlins logo a little more vivid. I also made sure the other fork leg didn't feel left out, and then they helped to add a splash of color to the sad-looking bike. Those fork caps might not be electronic, but they look straight out of MotoGP. Before tightening the bottom clamps, I threw the axle in to make sure everything was aligned nicely and spinning easily. And then once the top nut has been tightened and everything's been squashed down, it was time to finish with the pinch bolts. And I know the internet loves to see brake calipers hanging by the lines, so I'm sorry to disappoint you here.
So I think we should get the bike off of these jack stands so we can put the new radiator on before the front wheel and mudguard is in the way.
This was a super satisfying feeling, and seeing the bike on paddock stands immediately got me excited to ride it. But unboxing enough paper to print a magazine on got me back to reality. This might be the cleanest this radiator will ever be, and it might not have a puncture wound like the old one, but it was missing the mounting bracket, the horn bracket, bolts for the side shrouds, obviously the crucial fan, and even some rubber grommets. So I scavenged those parts from the old radiator, and then it was ready to go on the bike. However, I quickly realized that the mounting bracket must have been bent in the crash. I mean, it's supposed to be bent, but not at this angle. Luckily, I'm as good as Jeremy Clarkson with a hammer. Once again, I'd like to confess my love for these reusable and easy to use clamps. My feelings for the mudguard, however, are a little more complicated.
It might have been made in China, but it still costs a pretty penny and it looks awesome. But in hindsight, I was silly. At the time that I ordered this a month or two ago, the only option that you could get was a carbon fiber one, which is obviously expensive. I asked if there was a plastic one, but they don't make one. And then a few weeks later, they announced the 2025 Speed Triple, the updated one, that now comes with the same mudguard, but in plastic. So if I just waited a month or so, I could have saved a little bit of money, but at least this looks awesome.
This bike lost quite a few parts in this area of the mudguard. And by this point, I've made countless trips to Triumph Johannesburg for parts and expertise. But unfortunately, that yellow Speed Triple is no longer on the floor to give me motivation. It's been replaced by the 2025 model. My broken mudguard, however, does still have one fork cover, as well as the bolt I need for the missing fork cover and even the threaded clips. So it was relatively quick and easy to transfer all of that over to the new mudguard and install the new fork cover. The forks also need these brackets to support the mudguard. The right fork got a bit of damage in this area, but to my relief, the bracket still mounted up snugly. And interestingly, the ABS sensor wire routes on the inside of the fork to make it look nice and tidy. And then came the best part. Can you tell I don't have much carbon in my life? Yes, we're back to dangling calipers, but just for a moment. As sad as I am to lose my window decoration, it should look even better on the bike, and I was relieved to see everything going together smoothly without any fuss. And this was a satisfying moment. It's the first time it supported its own front end in months. Recently, I get to spend my days rebuilding crash-damaged motorcycles and test riding bikes I could never afford.
It sounds like a dream come true, and don't get me wrong, it is, but it also comes with a fair bit of stress behind the scenes as well. I don't have a guaranteed consistent paycheck every month. I don't have a career path mapped out for me, and sometimes that messes with my mental health. Now, we all have areas of our lives like this, and sometimes we need help with that. That is why BetterHelp is today's paid partner of this video, and they're on a mission to make starting therapy easier. A therapist can help you see things from a different perspective. They can provide advice and approaches to make good changes in your life. Sometimes the fear of making a bad video or assembling a bike incorrectly stops me from making anything at all. It's built up pressure in my own head and it stops me from growing. All you have to do is fill out a questionnaire and you'll be matched with a therapist ASAP. And it's easy to switch therapists if it's not the right fit. Asking for help can be as easy as that. So click on the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/chaoscauses to get 10% off your first month of therapy. Now, let's get this thing on both wheels.
I almost forgot something pretty important first, the kickstand. Even more importantly is remembering to plug the kill switch in. Plus, the gear lever bolts to the kickstand bracket, so I did that while I was in the neighborhood.
I mean, there's no reason this won't work, but I still want to do it. That's pretty cool. I haven't seen this in a few months. It feels like having a new motorbike in the workshop. And now I'm actually going to put it back on the paddock stand because I want to fill the coolant up, and working on a vertical level bike is way nicer. This is weird without handlebars.
I'm not sure why, but Triumph seemed to think that keeping the radiator filler cap under the airbox is a good idea.
For now, I'm just going to fill it with demineralized water because it's cheaper than pre-mixed coolant, because we are going to have to drain it once again when we flush the oil again and check the sump again because of the metal in the engine. But for now, this is going to work so that we can start it and heat it up decently.
I'm really not sure what was wrong with a normal radiator cap location. Even the expansion tank is easier to access, which isn't usually the case. And no, that's not a leak, I just have bad aim. But with that done, the airbox could be reinstalled. But between one pipe underneath the airbox that made its life mission to annoy me, and the intake rubber that didn't want a seat, I almost went to buy a Super Duke. Mercifully, that task eventually ended, but it might have water in it for life now.
I still haven't figured out if these handlebars are straight or bent. If they are bent, it's not so extreme that I can tell just like this. So I think the easiest way to tell if they're straight or not is to get the switchgear off so that we can put them on a flat surface and see if they are bent. But this switchgear is not like normal switchgear. You can't just undo the screws and take it off. You need a special tool that slots into here to remove it. Hence why I've been putting it off for as long as possible.
I've heard that you can get away with using a zip tie or a screwdriver, but since I didn't know what to expect, I struggled at first. But after sticking everything I could find in there, I got a tiny Allen key to work. And then once I knew what I was trying to do, the second one was easy. I made sure to conduct a series of highly specialized measuring exams that only other doctors will understand, but the diagnosis was cheap.
Okay, I'm calling it, these are straight.
But you might have also noticed that the joystick on my switchgear has snapped off. That's why I had to use a screwdriver to navigate the menus when I got the bike. This is how it's supposed to look.
But luckily, Triumph Johannesburg helped me out. So this is a spare switchgear, and this one still has a joystick on it, unlike mine. But it has a few extra buttons. It has a seat warmer, and I think this is fog lights, so it must be off of an adventure bike. But this whole half is the same as my bike. So I'm hoping that I can take it apart and swap the joystick onto mine, because after all, it's pretty much brand new. It's in better condition. It's just missing a joystick.
I didn't want to break mine any more than it already is, so I started by disassembling the donor cube. This is why. But it didn't take long to find that the joystick is its own part bolted to the cube, so it was easy to remove. Then I could disassemble my cube, causing less destruction along the way, and swap over the joysticks. And a few moments later, it was as good as new. All I had to do was remove the evidence that I broke the warranty seal. Shh. At first, I hated this approach to removing switchgear, but after working with it, it actually makes things easier. So with the handlebars declared straight, I slid the throttle onto the bars, put the handlebar clamp back on, and aligned the bars where I wanted them. Then I could bolt the left grip back on, which is not a sentence I ever thought I'd say, and reattach the clutch and front brake lever.
Well, dare I say, you might actually mistake this for a motorcycle if you saw it. And technically, the only thing stopping us from firing it up is that I don't have a fuel tank for it, so we can't actually give the bike any fuel. It's still getting repaired and repainted. So that means we have a lot to do in the next video, but by the end of that, it should be rideable.